for those of you that missed that first little accidental stream, we are back here with Luthier Stephen Walter. He makes my guitar here, the one that I've got next to me. If you caught our stream last time, maybe a few weeks ago now, we were talking about guitar, just general question answers about guitars. And this time, we're going to be discussing guitar maintenance specifically. So if you have a question about that, well, some have already been submitted, but if you do have a question, you can go to the YouTube stream or the Facebook comments. I'm going to be checking them here in just a bit. And if you can let us know that you can see and hear us, that would be awesome too. But I'm going to go ahead and let Steve take it away here with a little bit on humidity, because it's such an important time of year for that. So take it away. Thanks for joining me, Steve.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Always a pleasure. So yeah, humidity, wintertime, it's starting to get colder outside. When the temperature drops outside, that means we heat our air inside so that we're comfortable. And then that means also that the humidity drops. So we have to be careful about with wooden instruments, because wood expands and contracts with changes in moisture. So, all wood has a little bit of moisture in it at pretty much all times. And if, for example, my shop right now, which my hygrometer is telling me is 41%, which is a good number. That's what I want to keep it at for my shop here. That means that this wood has created or has come to some equilibrium, meaning that it's no longer shedding or gaining moisture. So if my humidity were to rise dramatically, that means that the wood would then absorb some of that moisture in the air and it would start to swell. If my humidity lowered drastically, then the wood inside the guitar is going to start escaping from the instrument and it will shrink. And when it shrinks, that's when we start to get cracks. So we have to be careful about that. Also, there are different aspects of action with some guitars that the action will go up or down depending on what's happening with the humidity that we have to look out for. So there's a lot of things going on. I have my hygrometer, of course, is one of my most important tools in the shop, because whenever I'm building a guitar, I want that number, the relative humidity, to be the same every time I glue pieces of wood together or I start to finish the instrument. So that can be really important. So how do we keep that humidity at that good space? Well, one of the first things, of course, we need to do is have a hygrometer. Now, these digital hygrometers, this is the one that's in my shop here that I've got just magneted to my steel frame there. This particular one is made by a company called Calibrating, and I got it a long time ago, and it just happens to be very accurate. Cheap hygrometers like this, basically, they use the same digital chip, I guess, that expensive ones do. The expensive ones are tested extensively. So when the cheap ones are relatively cheap, it's pretty random, but they're often between 5 and 10%, plus or minus error.
Hey, so we should probably just buy like 5 or 10 of them and mount them on our walls.
That's right. And then, what the great way to calibrate these things to figure out how accurate they are is to go to the Weather Channel, and look to see what the temperature and the humidity is in your area at that moment. And then go outside and find a shady spot and put it down, on something that's not going to, like the ground or something like that. And wait till it calibrates. And if it reads the same temperature and humidity, basically if it reads the same temperature as the Weather Channel, then you can see what the humidity is and see how accurate your particular hygrometer is. And these are really cool because it was reading 41%, but just as I've been holding it in my hand, the moisture from my skin has brought it up to 46%. So this one, they're pretty sensitive.
Wow.
The old-fashioned...
I was going to ask a question, excuse me, that I think people tend to ask the question, does it matter where the guitar was built? Because, the humid climate versus if it was in a really dry climate, does it matter so much? Because, of course, most luthiers are going to keep a tight control of the area where they keep their wood and build their guitars, right?
Right. It's a great point. Yeah, most modern luthiers will do that. And, we have the technology, of course, to be able to do this. But there's still a lot of luthiers, like in Spain, that work pretty, much in the traditional fashion. Those instruments tend to be built at much higher levels of humidity. So I build at 41. I know the Brunets, Marshall and Richard, build their instruments at 50% humidity. I would rather err towards the dry side because I seem to, in my experience, instruments that have more moisture or equilibrium moisture greater than that which it was built at tend to sound a little bit better, a little bit more open.
Makes sense.
But that's just kind of my experience with this.
Well,
so how do we keep that, get that humidity that we want? First of all, I think probably 40% or 45% is a pretty good achievable goal for most people in the United States in the wintertime. It can be really hard to get it higher than that in some houses. When I taught guitar at Furman University, my office, even though that was in South Carolina, which was pretty humid, whenever it got cold, it got very dry. And my office changed air so frequently that I couldn't get the humidity above 25% on most, really cold days.
Wow.
Even taping over all of the vents and that kind of thing. So I just have the humidifier going constantly.
Right. Now that brings up a question for me because, when I moved up to Milwaukee, I remember asking you about my guitar because I was really concerned about the humidity and it was going to be really dry there. And there were several methods that I ended up having to take because even though I was practicing most of the time at home, at some points of the year, where I could keep it a stable environment, what types of things can you do when, you're practicing in another area, maybe a practice room at a university or, you're warming up before a concert? You gave me some specific advice about that, and I wanted to touch on that.
Yeah, that's a really great question because the hard part about it, sort of the ironic part about it is when the guitar is just sitting here, it's got one hole, maybe it's got some ports on the side too, like this guitar does, but there's not a lot of air moving in and out of here. I did an experiment once where I just put a hygrometer, one of those things, inside a guitar and changed the humidity drastically. I went from my controlled shop to like a basement bathroom that was 70%. And I was, thinking, I waited for like 5 minutes thinking that a lot was going to happen. I pulled the hygrometer out. There was no change. It didn't change for 2 hours, even though they had that big of a difference. But then I started playing the guitar and it rose 17% after like a minute of playing.
Yeah. Wow.
So when you're playing the guitar, that's when the air is moving in and out. And sadly, that's when we have least control over the humidity. The best thing, first of all, is to try to control the humidity environment in the room that you're playing. So you want to have some kind of humidifier. Evaporative humidifiers are probably the best for this because they don't get too humid. They're not like throwing water in the air like a vaporizer would. The evaporate means that there's some kind of like paper or cloth wick that sits in water and then a fan blows over it and sort of, dries that wick out, but then you continue to have more water.
And you can't really find those at like department stores, for instance, right?
Oh, sure you can. You can get them probably even at most drugstores. You can get them at any place like, Walmart, Target, Home Depot, Lowe's, any place like that should have them, and they're not very expensive.
Wow. Okay. So I didn't even realize that there was a difference between the ones that have an actual wick in it and and then just the typical ones that you fill up a jug and.
Yeah, I fill mine up with a jug. It's a little bit big. I'd bring it over, but it's got these two sort of paper cartridges that that you take out and lower, and you got to change those a couple times a year because they get nasty. I actually even add, maybe like a teaspoon of bleach to every 2 gallons of water that I put in just to try to get it from killing mildew, mold and the stuff that will grow in there if it's given the opportunity. So that's the best way to control the environment, is controlling the air you're practicing in. But we can't always do that. Like you say, you're at the conservatory. Why so many conservatories are built without humidity control? I mean, they got like, millions of dollars worth of pianos in most of those in those buildings, but they don't have much in the way of humidity control. So, the best thing to do in that case is when you're done practicing, you can just make sure that your guitar is able to drink. And that is where we come to this kind of thing. A little case what are these called again?
Humidifier.
Sorry,
yeah.
humidity. Yeah. So This particular one made by Oasis goes between the strings, sits in the sound hole. That's great. There's no real need to humidify the outside of the guitar because that's not the part of the guitar that's having a problem. It's got some kind of finish on it, most likely, which is creating a barrier from moisture gain or loss. You know, I've seen sometimes people put like these things up near the head of the guitar, which is really pretty useless because most cases seal. And then you're humidifying this hunk of wood that has a bunch of finish on it. It just doesn't really do much. So it's important to get it inside the box of the guitar. You fill these with water. This one by Oasis takes about, I remember from my experiment that I did for a GFA talk on this a number of years back, that it holds about 12 grams of water, which is a good bit because it will lose about 2 to 3 grams a day, depending on the conditions. So, you know, you want to keep that in there. When it starts to shrink, you fill it up. Other styles of humidifiers, we have these tubes that Damp It was the company that made these. The nice part about this one doesn't have one, but I used to have one of these that had a little clip that you could clip to the sound hole wood of the guitar. And so therefore you could keep it in while you were practicing. So those were pretty useful. The drawback with these is the way you fill them is you have to soak them in water and then squeeze the excess water out. And you want to dry it really well because you don't want to put drops of water inside your nice guitar. And then once that happens, they don't take much water, so you've got to change them every day. You've got to, you know, remember to put water in them all the time.
Sure. Wow.
We have new products now, but this is the Humidipak by Didario. That I actually haven't even opened yet because I just kind of got it more or less to help somebody out when they needed one and a guitar in my shop. And so these have little packs in them that will keep they say this one automatically maintains 45 to 50% relative humidity, which is pretty good. I think in extreme humidity conditions, these will probably only last a week or two. You know, right. The packs, and then you have to get new packs. Right. If your conditions aren't extreme, they're fantastic. And I think they're really good. And again, this little pack will fold between your strings and sit inside your guitar, which is where you want it. And they'll I think do a really good job. You got to be careful. There was just one quick anecdote. A long time ago, I had a client with one of my guitars in New York City, and he was a young guy. I mean, he didn't really know much about this, and I didn't tell him much about it. But he called me one day and said, "There's a crack on the back of my guitar." And I asked him, "Well, how big is the crack?" And he, said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, how long is it?" And he said, "The whole way." So we're talking on the phone. We didn't have, this was, I think, pre-easy internet days or texting picture days. So I was asking him some questions. So how far wide is it? I said, "Well, what do you mean?" It's like, "Well, can you stick something in it? Can you stick a piece of paper in?" He said, "Yeah." "Can you stick a credit card in?" "Yeah."
Oh, no.
And finally, I said, "Can you stick a pencil in?" And he said, "Maybe."
Oh, no.
So what had happened was his guitar got so dry that the Brazilian rosewood on the back cracked open and peeled away from the braces of the guitar. Ooh. So he said, but my father went to a local violin shop and they gave them this humidifier and he's been using it regularly. He filled it up last month and it doesn't seem to need any more water. But it was one of these that had, it had these 3 tiny little holes in the plastic container that held a piece of diatomaceous stone, which holds water. And it sat in the head area of his guitar and did absolutely nothing. So
wow,
you gotta just be careful.
On that note, what are, assuming people are doing some of the right things, but they're not really sure if their guitar is being properly humidified, what are some signs that your guitar needs water, basically?
Oh, wonderful question. Probably one of the best signs that it really needs water badly is if we run our fingers along the edge of the fingerboard and the frets seem to be popping out, because the metal won't expand or contract, but the ebony wood that fingerboard is made up of will. Sure. So if that's getting too dry, then we'll feel it on, that they're sticking out. I'm sure everybody has, played one of those guitars that seems to scrape their finger. Right. If you look at the ends of the frets, and you really can't see this from here, and it looks like there's a hole, or if you run your fingernail over that area and it seems like you're going into it, then very likely that you've got too much moisture. and that, you know, the wood has got more moisture than it had when it was built. And that's a sign that the whole guitar is in that condition as well.
Wow, great. Well, what about the method of like putting in something like a damp sponge in a, or like a cut up sponge with a plastic bag? Is that a common way to do it?
That. That's it's a little bit crude,
right?
Because again, you're
risking the dripping.
That's a
right?
variation really on this. I mean, it's a fancy way of doing this. We used to, back in the days when there were 35 millimeter film cameras, and the film came in these little plastic tubes. You could take a paper puncher and punch a bunch of holes in that and put a sponge in. That's what we did before these were readily available. And then just stick it between the strings. So, this is one that D'Addario used to make that's basically the same thing. You can do that, I mean, in a pinch. I think that the difficulty is that the moist part of it can be touching the strings, which will corrode your strings, the metal strings. Right. There's a great risk of having something too wet alongside some part of your guitar.
Got it.
Emergency only, I would say.
That leads kind of nicely into a next question here, which actually I have a follow-up question to this one as well. But so Veronica Krieger asks, what would you do to let a guitar acclimate to a new climate, like humid to dry or vice versa? And my follow-up to that also would just be, this is like not just for like a move, like you're moving from location to location, but for just a temporary travel. Like you go to play a concert in a new place, maybe you were in a dry climate, you go to a really humid climate. I've noticed, at least with my guitar and the colleagues that I've spoken with, that you notice such a big change in sound too. It's almost like it takes a few days for it to feel like your guitar again. So absolutely. How do you expedite that process without putting the guitar in danger, for instance?
Well, really what you do is you'd really try to not let that process occur. Okay. I know that's a facetious answer. Thanks for the question, Veronica. It's a good one. And it kind of depends. Like if you're talking about like what Evan is talking about, you're going from place to place, playing some concerts. I know that some concert artists, when they go to a really dry environment, will turn on the shower, hot water in their hotel room and stick the guitar in the bathroom. And just let it sort of drink that water. That might be a little on the extreme side. And again, if you're not playing the instrument while that's happening, that moisture probably isn't getting into the guitar. What you really want to do though is keep track of your hygrometer and use any kind of humidifier that you can. If you're going from a dry climate to a moist climate, don't worry about it so much. I mean, the guitar might sound funny a little bit until it equalizes, but it's probably not going to crack, right? Because or seam separate or any of those things, just because those kinds of forces, the instrument, the way it's designed and put together, is able to accommodate those much better. Cool. So, but the other hand, going from a humid climate to a dry climate, you just have to be really meticulous about how you use your humidifier, and particularly in the guitar, almost constantly keeping one of these things in when you're not playing. While you're playing, as much as possible, play it. Select one room that you're going to humidify, and that would probably be the best way to do it. Yeah, and eventually, it's going to acclimate, but it won't ever. If a guitar is built in a humid environment and you bring it to like Arizona, and it's 10% humidity outside all the time and 20% in your house, it's never going to be comfortable with that level.
Sure. Well, so would you like to get to some other questions here? Just about guitar maintenance rather than just humidity. And then also we'll get to some ones that have been asked on Facebook and YouTube as well.
Perfect. Yeah. Sure. Should we talk about cleaning a guitar a little bit?
Yes, yeah. That's the majority of questions is just about the safe way to clean it, because I think everyone wants to get rid of, dust buildup and whatever.
Schmutz and whatever have you, right. Gunk. Yeah, so I've got this guitar here. I've taken the strings off, and to sort of give you an idea of how I go about cleaning a guitar, if you think your guitar is dirty, if the luthier of your guitar has chastened you having a dirty guitar, that's okay. Usually, I mean, most people who come in, who bring guitars into my shop, I say, you really got to clean your guitar a little bit more often. So it's a good thing to do and a good thing to know about doing, but we have questions about this. So first of all, it's probably really good idea to know what the finish of your guitar is. So what's it's made of. I French polish my guitars, and there is no such thing as a French polish finish. French polish is shellac. And the French polish is just the process of how we put it on the instrument. So it's a shellac finish. Shellac is not the most durable of the finishes that we have. It can be quite fragile. It doesn't like heat. It doesn't like moisture. It absolutely will not tolerate any exposure to alcohol. So it's a good thing to not use alcohol cleaning a guitar that's been French polished. So how do you know? I mean, if you've got a guitar, how do I know what the finish is? If perhaps the luthier is dead, or if I've got the instrument secondhand, or it's tough to tell. So you can ask an expert, ask a luthier that's, if you can show him or her your instrument at some point and say, what do you think that finish is? That's probably your best bet. If you can't do that and you really need to know, you can approach it with hesitation, but you can try some different solvents. So I've got while I'm talking about this right now, but before I flip it upside down, I've taken all the strings off my guitar. That is okay. A lot of questions about if you can, if you have to replace them one at a time, or if you can take them all off. You don't want to take all of the strings off of an instrument that has a sound post. So a violin, a cello, a viola, something like that. Because if you do, the sound post might fall down, and then you need to, go to a luthier to have that reset up. But when we do, a good classical guitar luthier will never glue in the nut, which is this bone piece here, or the saddle down here. So just to make sure that they don't fly off when I'm tipping the guitar up and down, I'll take these two things and set them over here. It's also good to note, and I do this on my instruments except for this piece, I always put a B and a T on the bottom of my saddle. That's this piece, so that I know which way to put it in. Because sometimes, I've had people say, I changed my strings and my guitar is buzzing like crazy. And, well, the reason is that they put their saddle in the wrong way. So you don't want to do that. So as you're pulling it out, just mark it with a pen. Then you'll know. So, so the guitar is, I'm trying to figure out what the finish is. I don't want to do this process where I'm going to be looking at the guitar the most. So in case I guess wrong and I use the wrong solvent, I don't want to do that in an area where I'm going to see it or where it's going to be obvious. I want to do that down here, right? So what you can do is take a little bit, if you suspect that your guitar is French polished, you can try to take a tiny bit of alcohol and rub just, in a small place, just with maybe a very damp cloth. But even probably, it's not best to do that. That's probably, and truthfully, is the best way to actually tell. And if it dulls the finish, then you've got shellac. That's a French polished guitar. If it does nothing to it, you've probably got lacquer finish, possibly catalyzed varnishes. Some builders like Robert Ruck used catalyzed varnishes for a good portion of his career. Extraordinarily durable. You can't do anything to those finishes.
Is there a nickname for that type of finish, or that's the nitro, or no?
No. Nitro is lacquer.
Okay, got it.
Right. So it's nitrocellulose lacquer is the official name of the whole stuff. And no, but the catalyzed varnishes are, again, not too many people do them. It's nasty stuff to work with. You need to have very special equipment. It's sprayed on. It's an automotive finish, basically. But Ruck used them, well. He was able to finish a guitar in 2 days with that stuff. Really amazing. So, but anyway, lacquer is the other usual finish for guitars, and they tend to be shinier. They tend to be flatter. There aren't any dull spots on the instrument with lacquer, but also they're very hard to apply, very thin. So you usually get a little bit better sound from the French polish.
Got it. Well, regarding actually cleaning the top, assuming, I think a lot of people that are watching have French polished guitars, if I had to guess. But assuming it's French polish and you're wanting to be careful at the top of your guitar, not make any cracks, what types of things do you suggest? Like, is it mostly just a very damp cloth, or any sprays or solutions, or
Yeah,
what?
a slightly damp cloth is probably best for day-to-day cleaning. People say, well, how often should I clean it? It kind of depends. If you're a teacher and you're talking while you're playing, as we know now, unless you're wearing a mask, that little particles of moisture come out of your mouth and they'll land on your guitar, and it's gross to talk about, but it happens to everybody. And though you have to remove that, because if it's French polish especially, it becomes ultimately part of the finish if you don't clean your instrument. So on every couple days, 3 days, taking a very a lightly dampened cloth or paper towel and just sort of rubbing these areas where they would have, this part where it's where it's basically exposed to what you're doing. It's also good to wipe the back of the neck for sweat from your palm, from your left hand. There are interesting places that people seem to accumulate dirt. Right here is a place that often needs a little bit more cleaning. So hitting those areas regularly with some kind of damp cloth would be great. And even a microfiber cloth that doesn't need to be dampened is a good thing to use, to just wipe it down. So every time you change your strings, though, it would be a good thing to, just while you're doing it, just to making it kind of a ritual, even if you don't take them all off at the same time and you change maybe just the basses or the trebles, then to use some kind of cleaner with your instrument. Now, the funny thing is you can use, I have a couple of different ones here that I've gotten over the years. This is a Dunlop Formula number 65 guitar polishing cleaner. And I know virtually nothing about this stuff. And I've used it for several years. I've had this bottle for a long time. It seems to do a decent job, but it doesn't tell me anything about what's in here. And that worries me some. The product that I really like the best these days is actually an automotive product cleaner. Meguiar's is the company that makes these things. And if you're thinking, oh my gosh, car, that's sort of brutal equipment. This stuff is made for the people who really obsess about their car finishes. Like they've got a restored car or something, and they're really babying it and taking care of it. This is what they call their final inspection, number 34. All of their products have different numbers. If for cleaning a little bit more extensively, I use this ultra finishing polish. That's a number 205. So these are some products that I like to use. And this is a spray that I'll use a sort of a towel like this, a little microfiber towel. I get these at Costco for, big pack for like $10. And what you want to do is not spray this stuff directly on your instrument, but spray it on the cloth a couple of times. And then with good light, you want to be able to see a reflection of light off the surface where you're working so that you can tell, what's happening down there. You just sort of, go over those areas really well, and then take the dry part of the cloth and wipe it off before it dries off by itself.
Wow. Okay.
Right? So just doing this, the reason that I like this stuff is because they say specifically that it's paintable, which means that it doesn't have any silicates in it, which would interfere with any further application of French polish or touch up or something like that. So these guys are really picky, so it's good to know. This will also remove bugs from your windshield. So, it's good stuff.
Just don't use the same cloth, right?
Don't use the same cloth, and try not to, of course, get bugs on your guitar. You smush bugs. So,
totally.
But this stuff works really well. It leaves a really nice sort of kind of a slick feeling to the instrument, and it cleans it up really nicely. So some other parts to clean are the fingerboard, especially. This is what people, maybe should do. It depends, if you don't sweat a lot in your left hand, or if you don't play a lot, you can do this every 6 months to a year. If you are one of these players that just, that sweats a lot and you're practicing 6-7 hours a day, and your fingerboard gets visibly grimy and your strings, dead really quickly, you want to do this a lot more often. So there are two trains of thought regarding this. Some guitar builders think that using any product like oil on a fingerboard is a bad thing, and others think it's a good thing. The reason that some builders, some luthiers don't like using oil for cleaning the fingerboard is that it makes the wood more brittle when you're removing frets for a fret job. So it's sort of a self-interest thing of the luthier. I've never had that problem. And again, if you've got an instrument that's 50, 70, 100 years old, maybe don't do this. Don't use oil. But I like to do it because, oil is a great cleaner. It is what, the Romans used to use in the Roman baths to clean instead of soap. It's part of soap, of every soap usually. So I have this this particular cloth that I just sort of dedicate to this. It's actually quite oily. And then I used a lemon oil polish, which is a product you get from
Could you
furniture.
hold both? Yeah, I was going to say, could you hold that and the polish up closer to the camera too?
So
that's pretty good.
Oil. Oh, and
we can see.
And this one?
Yeah, and okay, so the left one, that's Meguiar's Final Inspection 34. And
Right.
then the oil is...
It's from a company called Mohawk, and it's called Lemon Oil Polish.
Mohawk
so this
Lemon Oil.
has a slight lemony smell, but it's not really lemon oil. This is a petroleum product. It is an evaporative oil. Okay, so that means that some of it will soak in, but it's going to kind of evaporate out eventually. Other oils are drying oils, so you don't want to use anything like tongue oil, because tongue oil, it's not this tongue, it's a different kind of tongue.
T-U-N-G, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. But that will, or walnut oil is another drying oil. That stuff will actually stick and accumulate on your fingerboard. You don't want that. So with this oil dampened cloth that I use, I'll go this way between the frets and make sure I get my nail like right next to the fret. Can you see this okay, Evan? Maybe I should hold the guitar up a little bit more like this.
That works better. Yeah, that's great.
Okay, great. So I'll get all the dirt off this way and on the fret as well, because there's going to be some dirt on the frets. So after having done this, you can see that the fingerboard is visibly much more dark where I've done it. At least I can see that. I'm hoping you can too.
Oh yeah, you definitely.
So this gets most of the dirt off, and my fingerboard was dirtier than I thought. So it's good we're doing this. And just go between all of the different frets. We play more in the first position, second position. So typically there'll be more dirt down here than there will be up there. So you might want to spend a little bit more time with it and make sure as you're looking that you're getting everything. Also, this is a good opportunity to inspect your frets themselves and to see how divoted they are. If you press your really hard with your left hand, your frets are going to actually start to dent. And that ultimately means you have to press harder to make the string speak and not buzz. So, you want to make sure that if you're doing that, it's a good sign. I just had one of my guitars in for a little bit of work, and the guitar is 4 years old, and it almost needs a new fret job because the frets were dented so much. And so, talking with the player, this is where it's nice to have the playing experience that I do. I asked him if he thought it would be if he's ever had any conversations with his teachers about pressing less hard, because you don't want to waste that energy either. That's the thing. I mean, he was even getting to the point where he was excavating some of the wood on the finger or on the fingerboard. Yeah. So after I've cleaned all these frets, my fingerboard is glossy, and that's okay. I don't want to let that oil sit too long, though. I don't want too much of it to come in. So I've taken a paper towel, and I'm just going to sort of wipe off the excess.
Wow. Well, you know what? Well, something you mentioned leads me into another question that someone asked here. They said, and I guess this is in reference to purchasing a used guitar, but how to check if the guitar works properly and it doesn't need any adjustment, or if it needs one. Maybe they mean, the string action height and just when looking at a guitar, what are the things to check out? Yeah,
looking,
probably, or even if it's your own instrument.
Some interesting things to think about is, if unless you're going to measure it, and you can get a tool, excuse me for a second, like this. This is what we call a mechanics rule. And this is just a 6-inch ruler. And what makes this kind of neat is that it will, and this one reads 64ths of an inch as well as 32nds of an inch. But the important aspect is that it is graduated. That means the markings start from the edge of the tool.
Sure.
Right. So as I am looking at, the action, if I wanted to measure the action of a guitar, I go to the 12th fret here and I set this ruler down on the fret itself. And then if strings were on here, I would be able to look and read the distance between the top of the fret and the bottom of the string. Now, in the United States, I mean, we use the English standard system, of course, of measuring. So these that are 32nds of an inch, 64ths of an inch are easy to get. Everybody else uses metric system, of course, or most other countries. The measurement that we want to look for is kind of the standard is 4 millimeters of distance between the fret and the string at the 6th string and 3 millimeters difference at the 1st string.
And all at the 12th fret, right?
Yeah, the 12th fret, exactly. So if we're using English standard, that would be 5 32nds at the 6th string and 4 32nds at the 1st string. And that's standard action height. You want to make sure that, I mean, you can sort of sight down the fingerboard this way. It won't give you a lot of information unless you're really good at looking at that, but you don't want to see a big bend. In comparison with the string, which is a straight line, the fingerboard should be pretty straight. It should be a little bit bent because we want to have a little bit of relief there. So that's an indicator. These things can all be repaired though. So if it's a great guitar,
right.
You might not want to pass that up. A good thing to look at though is how much saddle sticks out above the bridge. I can't really, my monitor is very small. I don't know if you can see this. So, this is a good amount of saddle. If there's barely any saddle sticking up over the lip of the bridge, that means there's no room to lower the action if you need to.
Right.
So, you might want to hesitate or ask questions in that case. I mean, some of my old instruments tended to lift up more because of the way they were braced. So at the bridge area, they lift up and it gets pretty marginal. But then you can start working on angling the neck and the fingerboard, and there are ways to fix it.
Right. Yeah, in a video I made recently, I was saying that maybe one of the most important things when going to buy a guitar is you bring someone that knows more than you about it too.
Absolutely.
So that if you're unsure, then you have someone to ask.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, or you can, bring the guitar, to somebody. That's right. If you have that luxury to be able to do that.
So Pablo asks a question here, my good friend Pablo Salazar. He said he wanted to ask about lubricating the fretboard, which I guess you're kind of going over cleaning there, but he specifically asking about the tuning machines too.
Oh, yeah, great. So you can use, the tuning machines. It's funny. Modern tuning machines are so much better than they were, 20 years ago. And especially, better than they were 50 years ago. The reason is that they have little bearings. In fact, let me show you. Let's get these. So these, I like to use Scheller tuning machines from Germany, not Schaller, the cheap ones, but these are handmade, beautiful tuning machines. And most really good tuning machines nowadays come with what are called, roller bearings. So that means that this metal end here is on a set of bearings, and they just roll, very easily. So that means when they're stuck in the wood, that you're never getting that friction between what we call the roller, which is this part, and the wood of the head of the guitar, which is how they used to be made. So these are great. But you like to lubricate these gears a little bit every now and then, just to make sure that that they're functioning properly and they're not eating themselves up. Just a drop of like 3-in-1 oil every now and then, sort of like machine oil will do it. You can use, this is a bicycle chain lube, which is a Teflon, basically. And you can put a little drop of that, make sure you've got a paper towel handy because it tends to squirt out pretty easily. But that's pretty much what you have to do. And there's not much else, with modern tuners that you need to worry about. If you start having, like one of them isn't working right, or it's really stiff, again, bring your guitar to a luthier and see what's going on. Yeah. Right, it's not the tuner at all. It's the nut. So as you're doing that, it's usually one of the bass strings, of course, because they're wrapped. It's a 6, 5, or 4, and when you, let's say I'm trying to tighten, I'm trying to make it a little bit more sharp, and I tune my tuner, and nothing really happens, but it pops, and then all of a sudden it's more sharp. Means that the pressure is equalizing on either side of the nut. So yeah, so that's something that, again, you probably can't take care of too much yourself, but you can go to, get a luthier to floss your nut. Basically is the term. And so with that, it means I'll use some kind of abrasive cord like this stuff. And this is again just a product that I wouldn't even know where to get this. In fact, when I run out, I'm going to have to search. But I'll be able to find it online, of course. This is Mitchell's abrasive cords and tapes, and they have various different diameters and so forth. And you can sort of run this through there. What you can also do to help out is to take a lead pencil and draw inside the slot and just deposit as much of that carbon as you can, and that can help too. Yeah. Oh gosh. Up to a point, any guitar can be fixed. It's just a matter of the equation is how much money do you want to put into it. There are some amazing articles if you're interested in a journal called American Luthiery, put out by the Guild of American Luthiers, that details like the restoration of some early Torres guitars that are just phenomenal. I mean, it looks like it's a piece of junk, and it comes out on the other end as a playable instrument. Wow. Really quite amazing. Luthiers like Richard Brunet have done this kind of work before. That it's really stunning, and it's an art unto itself. This is something that I learned how to build guitars through through a lot of trial and error, and some information here and there. But restoring and repairing instruments is a different thing altogether. So yeah, it's how much money you want to put into it and what you have. Consider, for example, Evan and I were just talking about this earlier, just the cost of shipping a guitar back and forth, could be hundreds of dollars. And, if you're sending it to someone, if you have a local luthier, that can do work, it's wonderful. So, some things that I kind of look at as fatal flaws. Let's see.
Like big cracks on the soundboard or something.
Well, even the soundboard, yeah, you can fix that too. I mean, if you really love the guitar and it's worth it to you, you can fix a lot of different things. Sure. There are some weird stuff that becomes really hard. I remember looking at a guitar once that was built by it was Vicente Tate. Tate was he was a guy who worked in New York actually, and on the back of the instrument, I think the instrument had shrunk altogether, but the back braces were sort of like starting to poke the bindings and the purflings away from the instrument.
Wow.
And that was, fixing that would have mean, taking the back off and trimming those braces down and doing a whole bunch of work that would have, cost hundreds, if not thousands of dollars.
Wow.
So that.
Right, that would be something that would be ridiculous.
Again, it's a value judgment. If you have, if the instrument you have is an old flauta, it's probably worth that.
Yeah. Right.
If the instrument you have is just a really cool Yamaha from the 1960s, maybe not so much.
Right. Makes
So
sense.
again, but if it's dear to you, I mean, I spent some time repairing an instrument that was worth virtually nothing, because its owners, came to me with the instrument and the bridge had popped off, and he just said, this was my grandmother's guitar and she taught me how to play guitar and she's not alive anymore. This
Right.
is the only thing I have left, the memories from her. So it's like, yeah, I fixed the guitar, of course.
Definitely. Well, here's another question. So Benjamin Samuelson asks, what's a good way to mitigate bridge lift when using heavier gauge strings?
Oh, yeah, nowadays, there's no secret to making a guitar that's really loud. What you do is you make the soundboard really thin. And so it's a balancing act always. A really good guitar, I like to tell people, is a balance between the strings trying to tear it apart and the wood trying to hold itself together.
Sure.
And if you've got that equilibrium just, right where it is, you probably got a really great, loud guitar. There really isn't anything to mitigate that. I mean, some instruments, I use normal gauge strings on my guitar. And the reason I do is because I think with the way that they're built, how thick the soundboards are, what the bracing is like, all of that, I think they sound best if they have normal strings on. If I put tighter strings on, basically I'm just adding tension to the soundboard, right? Which means some parts of it are just not going to vibrate as freely because they've got more tension. And then part of that is, and perhaps this is what Benjamin's thinking about, is that the action will come up if you put higher tension strings on. So, you can have the saddle lowered. That's an extensive conversation. If I know someone and I know they're relatively handy, sometimes we'll talk about lowering your own saddle. But for the most part, leave this piece of bone alone. Or sure. It could be plastic, I guess. And in some cases, ivory. But anyway, you don't want to, do this unless you really know what you're doing or you have access to another piece.
You had mentioned before to me about sliding the saddle, and I think a lot of people have questions if that's okay or not.
Well, yeah, you can do it if your saddle is if it's bigger on one side and shorter on the other. Sure. Sometimes in the way that we build guitars, for the most part, because we want the action lower at the treble, because the strings don't move as much, and for a lot of reasons, then the saddle will be lower there. But a lot of people, some luthiers, build their guitars so that it's dead level across the top. Hauser to note. I mean, they actually cant this side of the fingerboard up a little bit more to make it so that response is the same. So it's if you have a wedgy saddle like that, you can do that. And some builders actually make a really long saddle that is very wedge shaped that people can slide and adjust their action that way. I don't like to have a piece, the bridge is a really important part of the sound of your guitar. And if you've got some loose piece hanging out, it's just going to vibrate, and it will sort of suck vibration away from where you want it, which is in the guitar, and out that little side. And it's maybe minuscule, but the guitar is not that loud, and I like to have as much of that transferred, as efficiently as possible. Sure. But that's it. Yeah, that is a way you can adjust your action. Some builders are also building adjustable action guitars. Garrett Lee is doing some really cool stuff with that. I've asked some friends of mine if they, who are particularly picky about their action, if they want to have something like that. And they say, no, I just want it set up right so I don't have to worry about it. So sure. It's one of those things. I haven't done that yet, but who knows? There might be something like that in the future.
Great. Well, as we're getting in closer to an hour here, I thought it might be a good question to ask on the top of a guitar maintenance is just guitar storage. And just some things about guitar cases that people should consider. And I know a big topic is about the wiggle room inside of cases. Should it be so tight or... and just those types of things. Maybe just a little bit about guitar cases and how to.
Yeah, sure. Let me take that in kind of the order that I'm remembering that you're asking. So, if you're storing a guitar for a long time, I think you should turn the strings down a little bit. Not till they're like floppy rubber bands, like you would do it on an airplane, but take it down maybe a major third or a fourth, so that it's considerably less pressure, and I think that will probably be good for the guitar. It's it might not sound the same when you turn it back up after a year, It's going to have to sort of like remember it's a guitar again and break in, but that's okay. It'll eventually break in. That's all right. If you're storing as well and you don't know about the humidity environment, obviously something like this isn't going to help you, because once that moisture is gone, it's gone. You could try the Humidipak things, and if you can check on them every month or so, from D'Addario, you can maybe do that. Get a case that seals very well if you're looking to store it for a long time. So anything with some kind of rubber grommet seal along the edges would be great. The new cases by, I think Visesnut cases are good with this. The new cases by Luthier cases are really good with that. The expensive cases, but and then in terms of like the fit inside of the guitar, I am of the opinion that I would rather have a little bit of room for the guitar to move out of the way of a big impact than be held very tightly by foam or whatever material on all sides. It doesn't take a lot to smash a guitar, particularly if it's got string tension and the pressure comes from this side here, which often happens in airlines because they drop, the case drops in this fashion. And when that happens, because of the string tension pulling that way, about 160 pounds or so of tension, if you get pressure from this way, the wood folds against its grain, right? And so that is a fatal flaw in terms of, of a break or a crack against the grain of the wood, or a split like that. So in that sense, I want to, if there's some impact, I want to have maybe a quarter of an inch of deflection room so that the guitar can be pushed out of the way before it's hitting something on the other side. That's my opinion. I mean, there are others that say, no, it has to fit perfectly well. And maybe, if there's a little room, you could, there's a possibility you could get, oops, there goes my nut. That's why you do that. So, you can get some little scratches or something from it wiggling back and forth. But again, that's, I'm wanting to prevent the big catastrophe. Right.
Definitely makes sense. Well, unless there's anything else you want to cover, or if we have any more questions, I'll check here. Just about guitar maintenance. Let's see. Oh, someone says, could you change the action on a vintage guitar, or would it affect the value of the guitar at all?
Anytime you have a vintage guitar, again, there's the decision to make of, do I want to keep a museum piece or do I want to have a playable instrument, right? Sure. And it can be if it's a museum piece, like Segovia's 37 Hauser that sits in the Metropolitan Museum, they won't even change its strings. I mean, Segovia's dirt. And let me tell you, people who did not clean their guitars, Segovia, there's so much dirt caked on that guitar that you can't even see that the purfling lines, have 3 different colors or 2 different colors, like a white, red, white. It just looks like all one schmutzy thing. So that's a museum piece. It's not intended that nobody's ever going to play that guitar again. They're never going to string it to tension. If you want to have a guitar that's an antique guitar and you want to play it, then you've got to make some of those adjustments, and you have to have it repaired and restored. Of course, the violinists, they've been playing these, centuries old violins for years, and they have all been modified. Almost all of them, to the point where, a modern violin is a different instrument than what that Antonio Stradivari made originally. It's different angles. The necks have all been changed, all of that stuff. So you have to make that decision. So yeah, if you're worried about it, like for example, I worked on a Hauser 2 for a while, and it had originally the Lahnsdorfer tuners that were, the original things, really good, marvels of German engineering from the 1950s. They weren't great by modern standards. They were a little stiff. So the owner decided he wanted to have Rogers tuners put on. So we ordered a set and brought them over, and we replaced those. But I, put those Lahnsdorfer tuners in every screw in a bag and, gave it back to him and said, somebody else might want to change it back.
Sure.
So, keep all of the old stuff. If you need to change the saddle, don't modify the saddle that exists if you're worried it's going to change its antique value. have a new one made and keep the old one. That's probably
Makes
the best advice. Yeah.
Great. Well, that just about wraps up the questions that we have here and that were submitted that aren't redundant. So thank you all so much for watching. Of course, you can find everything about Steve's guitars on, is it StephenWalterGuitars.com, right?
Yes, it is.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
And of course, any questions, feel free to contact me through the website or my email, or through Facebook, and I'll be happy to get back with you as much detail as I can.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you soon. Yeah, thank you. Bye.